Hey everyone, it's Daryl from Houseplant Journal, and today I just want to go over a few questions that I received in my new help email address, help@houseplantjournal.com. Now, the usual approach for getting plant help is you look at the plant, you see something you don't like, you ask, what's wrong, or what am I doing wrong? And you'll typically find answers like you're overwatering, you're underwatering, and stuff like that. But what I wanted to do was actually get a sense of where the plant lives and understand what the person is actually doing in terms of care. So whenever I get these questions, I inevitably have to ask some follow-up questions, and you'll see that as we go along. So first question, here is a Dieffenbachia. This person writes, "Love following you on Instagram, thank you. I'm a newbie in houseplants and need your help. Recently I purchased this plant. Why is it yellowing? Is it root bound? Too much water, not enough water? I would appreciate your help." So, contrary to conventional wisdom, you can't just make a diagnosis by looking at the plant by itself. You need to understand where the plant is growing and what the person is doing. So I responded asking, show me where this plant lives and tell me your thought process on watering and exactly how do you water. So I got back this picture and the response was, the plant is placed far from the window, about 15 feet away, but the room have large southeast windows and it is bright during the day. I touch the soil and put my finger into the soil about 1 inch to feel its moisture to determine if I need to water them. I really love having houseplants in my home and want them to do well. I will be grateful to hear your advice and guidance. So this picture is very telling. If you use my guideline of asking yourself, what does my plant see, or just what my plant sees, ask yourself, is it looking at the widest possible view of the sky that you have indoors? And when you're this far away, the view of the sky is this tiny little bit. And if I was to take a light meter and take a reading from this spot, I probably wouldn't get anything more than 30 or 50 foot candles, even if the sun is shining right through that window. Because when you're so far away, it's the view of the sky that determines how bright the light is. And in terms of yellowing of a plant, a lot of people just look at it and right away they get this sense of panic, the whole plant is dying. But it's not really quite that simple. You see, a plant when it's grown in a nursery, it's like an Olympic athlete training in world-class facilities, and the way that a plant looks when it's grown fresh from the nursery reflects the kind of light it gets as well as the watering and the fertilizing. Now, to understand the light situation in a nursery, just have a look at this picture. Like if a plant was sitting inside a nursery, its view, like the dome view around the entire plant, probably looks like this. And even when you're up next to a really large window indoors, your view looks like this. So the best you can possibly do is to put a plant close to the window, but that's not even going to come close to the view of the sky from a nursery. And then of course there is the issue of when the sun comes around and shines directly on the plant. So if indoors the sun comes and shines on the plant for, let's say, longer than 2 or 3 hours, and you have a bright indirect light type of plant, then you'll want to block the sun with a white sheer curtain. You see, I always have to explain all these details with light because when you leave them out, it makes people think that light is just somehow not that important, and then we get situations like this. And another issue is about leaf loss, especially when the lower leaves eventually turn yellow and fall off. So I went to the Denver Botanic Garden and saw this beautiful, very mature Dieffenbachia in one of their conservatories. And if you just look at the way this plant has grown so nicely into its space, you can see that the lower part of the branch is just where leaves have been falling off constantly. It's not that the care or the environment was unsuitable, which is the reason why there's no leaves there. That's just the way that this plant grows. And so the same thing will happen to your Dieffenbachia at home. It will only hold on to a certain number of leaves at the growing tip of the plant as the older ones fall off. So as long as you're giving it, number one, the best light you possibly have, and that means right in front of your window and all that other detail I gave you before, And number two, that you're watering it according to the strategy that it likes. And for Dieffenbachia, it's whenever it's partially dry, then you can let nature take its course. And that means as new leaves grow at the top, older ones will fall off. So let's go to the next question. This peace lily has started getting dry tips at its leaves. It's in the kitchen. I water approximately once a week. The temperature in the room is around 21 to 22 degrees Celsius, and it is not in direct sunlight. So again, just looking at the plant itself, I need to see where this plant has been living and understand more details about how you're watering. So the response I got was, I water it with about 60 milliliters of stale water once a week, and here is the overall space. Now when you look at this picture and think about view of the sky, I really hope that you're thinking there is barely any light this plant is receiving. Now let me be very clear. If you look at this picture and thought this is indirect light, it is not a problem with the person's interpretation of the instructions. The instructions aren't clear enough. Now the second thing here is also the 60 mils of water. That's like, this little tiny thing is about 60 mils of water. The goal of watering a plant is to evenly and thoroughly moisten the soil whenever the plant needs it. Now, when the plant needs it is a matter of how much light it's receiving and the overall temperature and humidity. But basically, you just observe the soil and then you will know when it needs it. For a peace lily, you are actually trying to keep the soil evenly moist, which means that the moment you notice that the soil is partially dry, even if it gets down to about half dryness, you'll start to see quite a bit of leaf wilting. So before it gets to that point, it is time to water. And when you water, 60 mils of water into that big of a pot is not going to adequately moisten the soil. You have to keep pouring the water until it drains out the drainage holes. Now in terms of brown tips, a lot of people say if you use water that's been sitting out overnight or even distilled water, you can prevent them. But I have a totally different approach to this. I look at brown tips as just, these are the signs of hard work, as in the older leaves, the ones that have been alive longer and transpiring longer, they will eventually become worn out and the tips of their leaves will eventually become brown. If you look at this picture here, you can see the leaves on my peace lily. The ones that are oldest are the ones that have brown tips, and the newest ones are pristine and nice and sharp. Instead of thinking that this is something that you have to prevent, you should just see it as the way that nature works. Now, if you give the plant the best possible light situation and you're watering accordingly, it will grow more. And so those newer leaves will kind of like offset your sense of how many brown tips there are, because you'll just have more newer and nicer leaves. But if you believe brown tips are a bad thing and that you have to prevent them, you will inevitably be disappointed. So I just wanted to share those two questions with you. Keep the questions coming. help@houseplantjournal.com. That's my email. Now, I admit I'm a bit behind. I probably have hundreds of unread emails, but I hope that if I post some of the responses, both on my website and also to YouTube, that people will start to get the sense for how to think about analyzing plant care. I'm Daryl from Houseplant Journal. Thanks for watching. Bye. Definitely not enough light.